want to thank everyone for your prayers while I was away last week. Many of you know that I was on a silent retreat. And getting back, I usually receive two common questions. The first is, Father Mark, how was your retreat? Which is then followed up with a second question, which usually goes something like this. Father Mark, on a silent retreat, what exactly do you do all day? Which is a good question. I wrote about that in the bulletin. I kind of just gave a typical day on a silent retreat. You can read that in there. But I'll say here now, I'll say this. I went into the silent retreat anxious. I went into those 6 days confused about a couple different things. I went into the retreat discouraged about a couple things that had happened the week prior. And I went into the retreat tired. Not the sleep deprived tired, but just tired. And by the time the 6 days were up, I was no longer anxious. The couple things that I was confused about, I received a very clear answers to. I was no longer discouraged, but rather filled with an immense amount of hope. And I stand here now, not tired at all, but extremely rested. How did that happen? Or you're like, well, Father Mark, you were away for 6 days. That's how it happened. You got away. But it wasn't just because I got away. Because we all experience being away for a week, whether that be a vacation or whatever it is, and we come back more tired or maybe more anxious. The reason why I came back with answers, the reason why I came back no longer anxious, and the reason why I came back rested is because I spent a lot of time with him. A lot of time. And the gospel we hear today is the invitation from the Lord. It just says, all who are labored, all who are burdened, if you're anxious, you're tired, he says, come to me, and I'll give you rest. Learn from me, he says, and you'll find rest for yourselves. I realize, as I say this, there's not a small number of us here, given this, the size of the number of people here, there's not a small number of us here right now who are in one or more of those spots that I was in when I entered in those 6 days. You're tired, you're anxious, you're confused, discouraged, right? And most of you can't just pick up tomorrow and go into a 6-day silent retreat. A parent mentioned to me, he said, Father Mark, when you were on silent retreat, one of the evenings I took the kids out to dinner, and one night, when we were at the restaurant, one child, on just one swing of the arm, knocked down 3 drinks altogether. The other child, when the check came, they, for some reason, decided that'd be a great time just to throw a great tantrum in the middle of the restaurant. I hope you enjoyed your silent retreat, Father Mark. So a lot of us can't just get up and spend 6 days in silence here. But there are 2 things that the Lord opened my eyes up to in the silence, and he opened up my eyes to a lot of things. But 2 things that he opened my eyes up that he wants me to offer here this morning, to offer as a help. Offer a help for you to put in place, not for you to put into place in going into a 6-day silent retreat, but for you to put into place this week. For you to put into place even today. And the first of those things is authentic leisure. For many of us, leisure and vegging out are one and the same thing. They're synonymous. We don't realize that there's a difference between those two. Genuine leisure refers to activities that recreate us. The word recreation, the recreate it's in there. In the activity, we are restored mentally, physically, spiritually. And note that I said activity. So a lot of time when we hear the word leisure, we think of laziness, we think of idleness, we think of someone just sitting on their hands. The classical understanding of leisure is that it's something active, it's something that recreates the soul. Vegging out doesn't do that. Vegging out refers to a passive, mindless mode of spending time. It often lacks intentionality and it lacks purpose. You know the difference, and I know the difference. I think even for myself, after a long day, running around at the office, I'm tired. I get back to the rectory and I've got 30, 45 minutes before I'm going to go to bed, and I just want to rest. And what I think I want is, all right, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to scroll through Twitter, I'm going to have a podcast going on in the background, then I'm going to minimize, a screen on the computer to answer a couple emails that I didn't get to, so I can get to before going to bed. And what became incredibly apparent on the retreat, and then since getting off the retreat, is that isn't recreation. Rest isn't able to be had there. Leisure isn't able to be had there. There was one of the afternoons on a walk on the silent retreat. I just found I just stopped underneath a tree, big old tree. And as I stopped under the tree, I just began to look at the tree and kind of be amazed by the tree, and thinking and remembering as a little boy, with my dad picking up these branches and cutting the branches on the farm. And these branches, even small branches, are so heavy with the leaves on them. And I'm looking up on this tree that's massive and has these huge branches and wondering, how is the branch connected to that outgrowth of the tree? And it just had me think, and I was just filled with wonder, and I was filled with awe, and it had me think about other things and led to thinking about other things. And after 20, 30 minutes, what the Lord showed me was like a brick hitting me of what I experienced right there, and what I felt like after doing that compared to after what maybe I would typically do at the rectory after getting back to the rectory after a long night. Night and day difference, the tree, the wonder, the appreciation, me being recreated in those 20, 30 minutes versus the blah feeling maybe that can be accompanied through vegging. Jesus' invitation today in the gospel and his invitation to you and me today, the coming to him, of receiving rest, it includes authentic leisure. It does not include vegging out. It doesn't include binging. So the question I think for us that the Lord has for us is what is my leisure? Is it authentic leisure? Is what I turn to regularly, is it authentic leisure? Maybe to look at my early mornings, to look at in the evenings, and most especially to look at my Sundays. And to see if my Sundays are filled with leisure in the classical sense of the word and what it truly is. The Lord gives us a command. He says to rest on Sunday. God rested on the seventh day, not because he was tired and he needed to rest, but it was a point to something to invite us into, to what we're made for is to be in communion with God and to receive and to be recreated. Do I have authentic leisure that recreates me? It can vary from person to person, but generally it's involved with pursuits such as reading, engaging in hobbies, creative endeavors, spending quality time with loved ones, exercise, outdoor activities. If you're a parent of little ones, I remember just after I got off the retreat, I spent some time with my family, and I remember I was one of the evenings late at night, it was the fireworks going off, and Luke just fell asleep on me. As he fell asleep, like for 20, 30 minutes, I'm staring at him sleeping on my chest. As my chest goes up and down, he goes up and down, and I'm just wondering in amazement and awe, being like, this is the same kid who all day has been running around crazy, skipping around with joy, throwing tantrums as well and crying, and now he's just here, resting, breathing. And the Lord just invited me into that, thinking about that and wondering about that, and inviting me into communion with him during that, and found myself being recreated in that moment. But I offer maybe just one thing, something for us to be on guard with, or on guard for, that oftentimes keeps us from the invitation that the Lord gives us here today for rest. And the thing, and that one thing is pride. Notice within the invitation today, Jesus speaks of his own heart, and he says, "Come to me and learn from me, who's meek and humble of heart." Here in America, as Westerns, especially in the 21st century, work and being busy has become the huge status symbol. How you doing? Busy. How you doing? Busy, 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 busy. More busy than you, to be sure. Too busy to go for the walk. Too busy for leisure. Be careful with that. Be careful. Because you can't be ready to accept the invitation that is always there from him, that he gives today, to say, "Come, who are labored and burdened, and I will give you rest." And maybe just a quick plea to young people who are here. Study after study is showing Generation Z has higher levels of stress compared to any other age group when that other generation, millennials, boomers, whatever generation, when they were at that age as Gen Z right now, Gen Z today is experiencing higher levels of stress than any other generation when they were at that age. And one reason I think that is because the inability to distinguish between authentic leisure and vegging. Choose authentic leisure, where God can be found and you can be recreated and restored, which cannot happen in vegging. It can't happen in binging. The second thing, last thing, very quickly, and it's simple. In fact, I keep fearing that it's too simple. But every time I think about going another direction, the Lord keeps leading me back to this one point. And it's this: God is everywhere, and he's always speaking. That becomes incredibly apparent in 6 days of silence. He's always speaking in the littlest of things, with a family member, in the midst of, he's always speaking. Paul, in our second reading from Romans 8, he says, "If the spirit of the one who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, the one who raised Christ from the dead will give life to your mortal bodies," he says, "through his spirit that dwells in you." Paul's just reminding the Christians, like, remember that the spirit who raised God from the dead dwells in you, he says. That Jesus is alive in you, and that he's always inviting you to be in communion with him. And he's always speaking to us in the littlest of things, guiding us all the time. And the voice of God is always encouraging. The voice of God is a voice that restores. It's a voice that recreates. So who here needs to be recreated? Who here needs rest? Who longs for peace of soul? We all do. We're created for peace of soul, to be at peace. It's not something that we can grab onto or slip into, but rather the biblical understanding of the lasting rest is something that's imparted to us by the divine. So this week, today, the rest of Sunday, don't be lazy. Don't be slothful. But make sure you take time for leisure. God is in the leisure. And what God did for me over the course of 6 days of silence, know that he can do for you in 10 minutes this afternoon. Make sure you take time for leisure. God is found in leisure, and we hear his invitation for rest.